We're continuing on Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, and we are starting a very important endeavor in the halachot of Birkot HaShachar and Birkot HaTorah, starting Siman Mem Vav Bezrat Hashem, which really is one of the most practical and important simanim to study and to learn. The Mishna Berurah writes a very important hakdama, which is really taken from the Pri Etz Chaim of the Marchu of Ari HaKadosh's teachings, and it's brought in Sharet Shuvah and Shulchan Aruch over here. He writes, Kodem bo'ol lebet haknesset, before a person comes to the shul, be'ot shu adayin b'chasar bet haknesset, when you're still in the courtyard of the Bet Knesset, over here would be by the door. Yomar bet Elohim na'alech beragesh, you say the pasuk of bet Elohim na'alech beragesh, that a person enters the house of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mikdash me'at, with regesh, with interpretation and feelings. The Chazal learned from this, based on a story of David HaMelech, that he learned one thing, perhaps from Achitophel, from his head of Yoatzim, his top advisor was Achitophel, as the pasuk says, Asat Achitophel bayamim hahem keshoel ba'urim, a person that asked Achitophel a question in the Etzah was as though you asked it from God and you got a direct answer from Urim Vetumim. That's how smart and wise Achitophel was. Later on, Achitophel, of course, turned against David HaMelech. It's a whole story of Bathsheba. He was the great uncle and so on. But nevertheless, Chazal tell us that David HaMelech learned one halacha from Achitophel, and therefore he calls him Alufi Umiyudai. From here, the Mishnah learns, if a person learns even one halacha from a person, he is chayav to respect him. He becomes your Rebbe in that one thing. And Chazal tell us that this is the one thing he learned. David HaMelech, of course, was a very humble individual, but when he became the king, he felt that the king should be carrying himself with a certain kavod, which is true. Melech shemachal al kevodo en kevodo mahul. A king that forgives his kavod is not forgiven because his kavod is not his. He really is the representation of Hashem's kavod in the world. Hence, he's not allowed to be mohel his kavod. A tamil chacham rav shemachal al kevodo kevodo mahul. Is a Torah, it's his Torah, he could forgive his kavod. He cannot forgive his bizayon. If somebody disgraces a tamil chacham, not the Tamei Chacham nor anybody else is allowed to be mohel on kavod of the Torah, because the Torah has been disgraced. Person, he himself and other people who see it have to stand up against it. But the kavod is machbub. David HaMelech felt that the king should carry himself with pride everywhere, and so therefore he was walking with pride. And when they went into the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, Achitophel told him, "No, Bet Elohim na'alech beragesh." When you come to the Bayit of Hashem, even if you're a king, you have to go with humility, you have to go with humbleness. And that's the halacha he learned from it. That's the pasuk we say when we stand by the door of Bet Knesset as we're ready to come in. You enter the Bet Knesset in the recognition that this is Bet Elokim. This is the house of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you enter it with interpretation, with feelings of yir'ah and pachad and love of Hashem and his fear. And that's the pasuk that you say. V'yargish v'irtala atzmo b'yikaneso, and you should feel and you should be afraid. And it's a certain pachad. We're not talking about being a pachad in a negative way, but you're entering something that is tremendous. The Bet Knesset mirov pachado. Again, we mentioned the story of Baba Meir Abu Chasera, the son of Baba Sali. Baba Sali used to stand up maleh koma. When his son Baba Meir walked into the room, he held of him so much. It was a tremendous Tamei Chacham and a massive Mekubal, a real once in a generation type of, or many generations type of thing. So I heard from Rabbi Zion Musafi Shlita, they said when he was young, Bachur, he was walking with Baba Meir Abu Chasera, and he said we were talking and learning the whole time, and he entered the Bet Knesset, before Bet Knesset, he puts his hand in the mezuzah, his whole face turns red. And he says this pasuk, Bet Elohim na'alech baragish. And he says, he bows all the way to almost to the ground, and he would not talk. He said he entered the Bet Knesset, went to the Echad, he kissed the parochet, and then they went to the side room, and they learned again. This is something that is the Chumrah of Ari HaKadosh. Ari HaKadosh was careful not to even say Divrei Musar in Bet Knesset, lest Chas v'Shalom is going to come to speak Devarim Betelim, Divrei Chol. So therefore is again a Chumrah that many try to at least look up to be careful not to speak idle talk in the Bet Knesset, in the Bet Midrash. V'yamtim le'ishem ma'at v'yomar v'ani berov chastecha avo betecha eshtechaveh lechal kodshecha beiratecha. You say all of those Sukim. Again, this is the Sharet Tshuva over here brings this in the name of Pri Etz Chaim from Marchu, in the name of Ari HaKadosh, v'achar kach yikanes, and then you enter the Bet Knesset. Now, according to Kaf HaChaim over here, you say the pasuk right away after you enter the shul. Say v'ani berov chastecha avo betecha, right after you have entered already in the Bet Knesset. And this pasuk that you have the sod of Bet Knesset in it, the Kaf HaChaim again brings from the Mekubalim that the sodot of entering Bet Knesset are merumaz in this pasuk. So therefore, you say it in Lashon, it's said in Lashon Halicha, and the Ben Ish Chai in Torah Lishma writes that every person should be careful to walk to the Bet Knesset Beraglav, not to bike or drive, but to walk to the Bet Knesset. It says. The Gemara again in Masechet Brachot Daf Hey, Gemara discusses this Schar Halicha and so on, getting up early in the morning and going to shul, and therefore Ben Ish Chai writes again. Generally speaking, we assume that Torah Lishma was authored by the Ben Ish Chai, even though that at some point it was a very big debate. Rav Yaakov Moshe Hillel, in a very old sefer of his, I haven't seen in the print recently, it's called Hod Yosef. He very strongly pushes that this is the Ben Ish Chai. Chacham Obadia, of course, in Yabia Omer wrote the Tshuva, indicating otherwise, but even Chacham Obadia at the end writes that in Kabbalahu Nekabel, there are strong indications that Torah Lishma was written actually by the Ben Ish Chai. That's how we generally assume. And he writes there that even if you are Ashir v'nichbad, that's not your custom to walk braglayim, walk your own way to different places, and you're carried by a carriage and so on. He says, you should not be so exacting in your kabbalah, you should walk. Now, people nowadays who live much farther from the Bet Knesset because we're blessed, or otherwise, however you call it, with having cars and so on. So the ones who want to be mahmir like the Ben Ish Chai, they're careful not to park right next to the shul. They park a little bit farther, and they try to have at least a little walk, that they should show the excitement and walk with their own feet to the Bet Knesset. And the Ben Ish Chai writes, also Kaf HaChaim brings this, that it is very important for Shelemut Adam, for the perfection of a person's soul and neshama, and the Hasagot Haruchaniyot, the achievements of spiritual caliber. It's important to do this, that the Pri Etz Chaim writes, to stand by the mezuzah and to say the psukim that we just mentioned, and so on and so forth. And the Ari HaKadosh writes that before tefillah, you also say, we said this in the earlier simanim, you say, I'm ohev et kol echad mibnei Yisrael kenafshi u'me'odi, and so on. Those are, again, the routine that the person does in the entrance of Bet Knesset. The Sefer Derech Chaim, he writes that a person, when he says, Eshtachaveh lechal kodshecha, he should bow to Aron Kodesh. And the Kaf HaChaim writes, because the three Avot, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, are merumaz, are hinted to in this pasuk, יכוון שנרמזו בו שלושה אבות. I'm reading the words of Kaf HaChaim over here. ולעניין הנכנס לבית כנסת לתפילה, מנחה וערבית, the poskim write that from Shara Kavanot, you see that you have to say it still by mincha and arvit as well. It's not necessarily what the Briatz Chaim writes, that you say it by shaharit, but by mincha arvit also when you come in the evening to the shul, also you say the same psukim as well. Okay, now, how about the person that does not have tefillin when he comes and enters the Bet Knesset? To say, "V'ani berov chastecha avo betecha eshtachaveh lecha l'kodshecha be'yiratecha," be'yiratecha, you should have the tefillin that you see that he has the fear of HaKadosh Baruch Hu on him, like it says, "V'ra'u kol amei ha'aretz ki shem Hashem nikra alecha v'yaru mimeka." That's the tefillin shel rosh. So Zohar HaKadosh actually discusses this, that if a person comes to the shul and he doesn't have tefillin on, he's not allowed to say this pasuk. That is to that degree that you're not allowed to say the pasuk, says the Zohar HaKadosh, if you're not wearing your tefillin. Hence, you see a lot of people, we spoke about this in the very beginning of Shulchan Aruch, that Zohar HaKadosh is maflig, me'od. It says tremendous things about someone that walks from home to the Bet Knesset with tefillin. There's a whole discrepancy in Kitvei Arizal, whether or not is more important to be from Asara Rishonim, from the first 10, or to come with Talit and Tefillin. It seems to say one way, and Ben Ish Chai Paskins like that. Rabbi Yaakov Hillel disagrees with that. He says that Ari HaKadosh had abdominal pain and stomach problems, digestive issues and so on. Therefore, he didn't have guf naki. So that's again for a different time. But nevertheless, the simple understanding of Zohar seems to say that you have to have your tefillin on. Therefore, you find many people who they stay in one of the rooms in the shul before they come in. Again, for us, it's a little different because we have a shiur before shacharit. Now we have stihot before shacharit, and the stihot is significantly earlier than the time of talit and tefillin, so at least 12 or 15 minutes earlier. So you cannot really even put on tefillin before stihot starts. So it's a little bit different, but in a case that is possible, many people who go in the Haser Bet Knesset, in the rooms on the side, and so on, they put on their tefillin, and then they come in, putting their hand on the mezuzah, doing this pasuk that we just mentioned over here. And the Ben Ish Chai also basically writes the same thing, which he writes, "You're kemeid edut sheker." It's like as if you're lying, you're giving a false testimony. If you say be'iratecha and you don't have tefillin on, how dare you do that? It says basically. So Ben Ish Chai also conquers the same way as the Kaf HaChaim based on this Zohar, but Lemaaseh, he actually puts it. He says if you are in a day that you don't put on tefillin, right? Shabbat, Yom Tov, Chol HaMoed, the days that you don't have tefillin, then you say the pasuk still, even though you don't have tefillin, because there is not a chisaron. It's like an arya de isura reviale. It's like something blocking you from putting on tefillin. It's not that you are being me'id edut sheker, you don't care about tefillin, or you're lazy and negligent. It's because today we don't put on tefillin because he has his own oath. It's Shabbat, it's Yom Tov, it's Chol HaMoed, whatever it may be. Therefore, you don't. And of course, based on the Shara Kavanot that we mentioned, that in Mincha Arvit you have to put it as well. Of course, in Mincha Arvit you don't need to have tefillin, even though that the mitzvah of tefillin is the whole day. Still, you don't need to have it in that way, based on the Zohar and Kaf HaChaim. That's really the chidush that you learn from the Ben Ish Chai that says whenever you're not expected to have tefillin on, you don't necessarily need to have it on when you enter the shul, and you still could say the psukim avani berov chastecha, and so on. Now, if a person has tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam when he enters the shul, for whatever reason it may be, the Ben Ish Chai writes in its Shuvah in Rav Pe'alim that even though that al pi psak halacha, the tefillin of Rashi is ikar. We have spent a lot of time on explaining this when we spoke about the beginning simanim of Hilchot Tefillin, the machloket pashtanim and mekubalim, the machloket between the poskim, regular poskim, and those who follow the Kabbalah. We spoke about this, that al pi halacha, tefillin of Rashi is ikar. Al pi sod, Both of them are really important, and the Shenehem Emet. And we spoke about the fact that Ravadia has a lengthy tshuva on this matter in Chelek Aleph of Yabia Omer, in Siman Gimel of Orachayim. But nevertheless, the Rav Be'alim, the Ben Ish Chai, writes that a person that has only tefillin of Rabbeinu Tam, even though the Al-Pi Halacha, that's not the Ikar tefillin, and even Al-Pi Kabbalah, you really should have both of them together. He writes that you could still say this psukim, and it's not considered a problem. This is in Chelek Bet of Rav Be'alim in Siman Hey, I believe. So the reason, another thing that we mentioned over here in the Mishna Berurah, we said that you say the pasuk of and afterwards you enter the shul, right? Now, why do you have to say the pasuk dafka before you enter the shul? The Orot Elim, Sefer Orot Elim, was written by Rabbi Eliezer Papa. He's the author of Pelei Yoetz, best known as his Sefer Pelei Yoetz. He has also Shelot Utshuvot Pelei Yoetz. He has the Sefer Chesed La'alafim, which almost every single page in Ben Ish Chai has a quotation of Chesed La'alafim. I have a theory that really Ben Ish Chai a lot of it was based on the Sefer of Rabbi Eliezer Papa of Chesed La'alafim. There are many places that even Ben Ish Chai does not necessarily quote his name, but the content is very similar and perhaps taken or based on the writings of Rabbi Eliezer Papa in Rav in Turkey, the Pelei Yoetz. So he has a sefer on Shas called Orot Elim. It goes based on Seder HaMasechtot, and he writes in Sefer Orot Elim that saying this pasuk of Ani berov chastecha avo betecha vol betecha ashtachaber chal kodshecha, it's you taking reshut from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to enter his room, so to speak. Now, we're going to discuss this a little bit more later on, that, again, he says that you have to say it when you're standing by the door before you come in, because you're getting permission from HaKadosh Baruch Hu to come to his room, to come to his house. Now, this whole siman that we have is based on the fact that everything that the person uses from the world, you have to say a bracha. Based on the Gemara in Brachot, the Gemara in Brachot says, "Asur le'anot me'olam hazeh v'lo bracha." It's asur to use anything from this world without blessing Hashem, without recognition that this is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's. And therefore, the Gemara says, even though that we don't have a real pasuk, a real source, biblically speaking, for having to say bracha rishona, to say the before bracha, but it's a svara, it's a logic that when you want to use something, you take permission. The Gemara really asks a stira between two psukim. In one pasuk, it says, La Hashem ha'aretz umloah. Everything in the shamayim and aretz, right? Everything is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even things that are in Eretz, right? Ha'aretz umloah belongs to Hashem. A different pasuk says, Hashamayim shamayim laHashem, v'ha'aretz natan livnei Adam. The shamayim is Hashem, and ha'aretz it gave to us, so it's ours. So Gemara says, wait a second. In one pasuk it says it's ours. In one pasuk says is Hakadosh Baruch Hu's. Which one is it? The Gemara says there's no stira. Kan kodem bracha, kan la'achar bracha. Before you acknowledge that everything is Hashem's, you're not allowed to use it. Who allowed you to use anything of Hashem's world? It's Hashem's world. You don't go to somebody's house and just walk straight to the fridge and open the door and just take it right in front of their face. Can you imagine how that feels? If someone knocks on your door, you open the door, and say, "What do you want here?" It says, "Shah." And he walks to your fridge and starts helping themselves to everything you have in the fridge. How do you feel about that? Right? That's basically, the Gemara says, that's basically what we do. We live in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world rent-free, and using the things is his. If you don't acknowledge that's his, then if you benefit from olam hazeh without bracha, you are a mo'el behekdesh. Everything is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's like belongs to Beit HaMikdash, belongs to Hashem. If you benefit from items that belong to Beit HaMikdash, you're mo'el behekdesh. Stealing, and it's worse than just a regular stealing, It's very bad. But when you say bracha, you recognize HaKadosh Baruch Hu, everything is yours. Even when we give to Hashem, it's from Him. You're not paying rent for giving a little 20% of your income to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's like the pasuk says, Hashem mimecha hakol umiyadecha natanu lach. Hashem, everything is from you. Umiyadecha natanu lach. We literally take from your one hand and you give to your other hand. Taking from one pocket, putting it in the other pocket. Mimecha hakol. Everything is from you. Miyadecha, from your hand, natanu lach, we give to you. Because even what's mine is not mine. It's yours. You have given it to us. But so therefore, we can't pay, but we have to recognize and acknowledge. And therefore, Chazal, we're metaken, brachot on every single hana'ah that we have during the day. You wake up, you open your eyes, you say, pokach ivrim. You have clothing, you put the clothing on, malbish arumim. Every bracha that we have over here, says the Mishna Berurah in the first Seif Katan, is asur le'anot me'alam hazeh b'lo bracha. So it's very much aligned with this Ben Ish Chai and Orot Elim, that the Rabbi Eliezer Papo says, you are taking permission, Netilat Reshut, to enter HaKadosh Baruch Hu's house. Hashem, please, like we say by Tefillah, it's so beautiful when you think about it. It's so routine when you don't. Every time you stand to daven Shemona, they say, Hashem, sefatai tiftach, ufi yagid teilatecha. Hashem, open my mouth. Please permit me to say your praises. It's a zchut to be able to say praises of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not pashut. It's something very big and very important. So that's exactly what we do. When we enter the shul, we're taking permission to enter, to come into the Bet Knesset. It says, the Shulchan Aruch. Let's now begin. When a person wakes up from his sleep, this is again based on Gemara. Rambam paskins this Gemara kemot shehi, and Shulchan Aruch really is paskening like the Rambam. We will very soon see that the minhag is not like the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch. We do it a little bit differently, but the Gemara says in Masechet Brachot, Daf Samech Amud Bet 60b, that when a person wakes up in the morning, Yomar Elohai Neshama Shratata Bi Teorai old Elohai Neshama we say. Keshishma Kol Atarnegol, when you hear the sound of a rooster, right? Alav Shalom. Back in the time they had roosters in their vicinity. You say Anotel Sachvi Bina. Say Anotel Sachvi. Sachvi does not necessarily mean just a rooster. It also means rooster. Also means ourselves, right? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us sechel to differentiate between night and day. It's very much spelled out in the specific talent that roosters have, that by Alot HaShachar, before you even by Mamash, by point of dawn, they already know and they start calling. Therefore, we say, that's a benefit that we have to wake up early in the morning, early enough to be able to say it, right? When you put your hands on your eyes, you say the bracha pokach ivrim when you put your hand on your eyes. In the morning, when you open your eyes, basically. When you sit, you say matir asurim, that now you're not like tied in your bed. You could move, you could sit up, and you could move your limbs and your body. Zokef, when you stand up from your sitting, you say Zokef kifufim, that Hashem stands up the bent ones. When you put your feet now on the ground to walk, you start walking, you say, I have a ground to walk on. Not to be taken for granted, right? That you have, you have something to walk on. You say, Hashem has kept the earth on top of the water, even though that really the base of everything is malleable and liquid to some extent. Right? When you start putting your coat on, you wear your shoes, you say, that Hashem has done all of my need for me, because shoes are very important. When you have shoes on, you could go around and do everything. We don't have shoes on. Imagine, especially in a time that everything was, sharp items in pieces of wood and stone and pebbles and dirt all over the place, let alone the chashim v'akravim, the scorpions and snakes and so on. It would not be able to do much without shoes. So therefore, when you have shoes, that's something very important, something very, very special that allows you to do everything that you need to do.
What if you can't walk?
Again, so forget about that. What if you can't have shoes on because it's Tisha B'Av and you're not wearing shoes? So many people, and we're going to get to discuss these things, minhag of some has been not to say Sha'asa likor sorki on the day of Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippurim, because people are now wearing leather shoes, comfortable shoes, and so on. But nevertheless, Chacham Obadia, the Sof Yamav, he became more open about his minhag that he's always been saying, Sha'asa likor sorki, even on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippurim, because he felt that the brachot Chazal instituted were nitkan al minhago shel olam, were instituted based on the minhag of the world, not necessarily that you're thanking for what you benefit from the world, but you're thanking Hashem for having created the ability of having shoes, that we have shoes, we us people have shoes and we wear shoes, and so on. So now there are also say, well, everyone is Yachef on Yom Kippurim. Oh, the Jews are Yachef. But then the argument would be that, again, it's not a bracha on today's benefit that you draw, but nevertheless, it's a bracha on minhago shel olam, on the custom that we have, and that's really the halacha me'ikar adin as well. When you put on your hat, says the Shulchan Aruch, misnefet berosho yevarech oter Yisrael tifara. You say the bracha oter Yisrael. When you do netilat yadayim, you say al netilat yadayim. K'sheyechas panav, and you wash your face afterwards. You say hamavir shena me'enai u'tumah ma'afafai yehi ratzon, and baruch atah Hashem gomer chasadim tovim la'amo Yisrael. And then the Shulchan Aruch discusses details of where you answer amen, where you don't. We're going to get to the details of this Shulchan Aruch and why the minhag of this generation, our minhag is not like this. We don't go through the process of waking up saying the 18 brachot one by one as the process develops. We do all of those things. We get dressed, we do netilat yadayim, we say Birkat Torah, and then, or we don't say Birkat Torah, we say the brachot, we sit, when we're dressed completely, we sit and say all the brachot back to back, one after the other. Then we have to discuss how the minhag has evolved and why the minhag is not like Shulchan Aruch, which Be'ezrat Hashem we will do in the days to come.